Somewhere on the 6th of February, a person sat down at a keyboard. We don't know the room. We don't know the city, maybe Tucson, maybe 1,000 miles south of it. We don't know the hour, though the choice of words suggests it was a hand that had already decided something was over. What we know is the sequence of small, deliberate acts that came next, because every one of them was a decision. This person opened a connection routed through a secure server, the kind built for one purpose, to erase the trail back to a keyboard. Not a default setting, a choice. The choice of someone who understood that the words they were about to type could hang them, and who intended to send them anyway. And then they wrote 3 sentences. She perished shortly after she was taken. She is buried in nature now. We are truly sorry. Read them again slowly, because these are not the words of a stranger to this case. These are the only words we have that come, if they are real, directly from the hand responsible. Not a witness, not a theory, not a detective's reconstruction. A confession, an obituary, and an apology compressed into the length of a text message, and sent not to the family that was begging for her, but to a newsroom. The country only read those sentences this week. 4 months they sat in an inbox, and the moment they became public, the question at the center of this entire case quietly changed. It is no longer only who took Nancy Guthrie. It is who sat down and wrote this, and what those 3 sentences tell us about them. Because a note like this is not just a message. It's a fingerprint. And whoever left it made a mistake the figure on the doorbell camera never did. That figure never spoke. This one did. And people who speak always say more than they mean to. You're watching True Crime Files documentary. You already know this case. You don't need us to walk you back through the doorbell footage and the bloodstain and the empty house. You've been here since February, so we're not going to insult you with a recap. We're going to do the thing the rest of the coverage won't. We're going to treat that second note as evidence in itself and ask what kind of person it describes, because the words are all we have, and the words are talking. If you've already got a theory forming, good. Put it in the comments and defend it. We are going to read everyone, and we're going to come back to the strongest ones at the end. If you're new here despite knowing the case, subscribe. Because we go deeper on the details everyone else races past on the way to the next headline. Now, let's read the note the way the investigators are reading it, one word at a time. Start with the verb, perished, not died, not passed, not asterisk she's gone, perished. It's a strange, formal, almost literary word for a person to reach for in the worst sentence they will ever write. It's the word you'd use for livestock in a flood, or for a stranger in a headline 2 states away. It holds the writer at a distance from the act. There is no grief in asterisk perished. There is no intimacy in it. There is a body and a category and nothing else. For a woman who was, by every account from the people who knew her, sharp and stubborn and entirely herself at 84, a churchgoer with a Sunday plan, and a heart that needed daily medicine. Perished is the word of someone who never knew her as a person, or the word of someone working very hard to sound like they didn't. That's the first fork in the road, and you have to pick a side. Either the writer is genuinely a stranger to Nancy, in which case the clinical distance is honest, or the writer knew her, and the coldness is a costume. A way of writing about a person you took as if she were freight that didn't survive the trip. Now look at what the sentence leaves out. It does not say her name. In the worst, most intimate sentence anyone could write about Nancy Guthrie, the author never once writes asterisk Nancy. She is she. She is the object of the verb. Writers who feel something name the person they're writing about. The name is the grief leaking through. The absence of her name across the whole note is either a stranger who never had it to leave out, or a person deliberately starving the sentence of any warmth that could give them away. Now the second phrase, buried in nature now. Listen to what that phrase does and does not do. It does not say we left her. It does not say we dumped her. It says buried, an act of care, almost the verb you use for someone you intend to be at rest. And it says in nature, which is either a genuine clue or a beautiful piece of nothing. Nature is the entire Sonoran Desert. Nature is every wash and ridge and stretch of border country from Tucson to Nogales. If the writer wanted to confess a location, they confessed the whole map. If the writer wanted to asterisk sound like they'd confessed while giving up nothing, they did that perfectly. And notice the small, awful tenderness in asterisk, now asterisk, buried in nature now, as if to reassure. As if to say, it's done, she's settled, you can stop. That single word is doing emotional work. The question is whether it's doing it for the family's comfort or for the writer's cover. And then the third sentence, we are truly sorry. This is the one that has broken the case open because it does not belong. It is the wrong sentence. People who plan an abduction, who disable a floodlight, mask their face, and route a ransom demand through an anonymizing server, do not, as a rule, circle back 4 days later to express remorse. Remorse is not a feature of this kind of crime. A retired FBI agent named John Iannarelli said exactly this when the note surfaced. His reaction wasn't how sad, it was asterisk how suspicious. Why now, he asked. Why come forward and extend condolences? It isn't in the nature of the people who do this. And then there's the pronoun which almost nobody is talking about, and which may be the loudest tell in the whole note. We are truly sorry. Reporting on the note's contents also has the writer saying they never intended to hurt her. Watch those two words sit in the same short message, we asterisk and they. A writer who says we are sorry asterisk is placing themselves inside the act. A writer who says they never intended is narrating it from the outside, as if reporting on someone else. You don't usually get both from a person describing their own crime. You get we or you get asterisk they. The instability between them is the kind of thing that happens when a writer hasn't fully decided which story they're telling, whether they're the one apologizing or the one explaining what the asterisk other asterisk people did. So hold the whole voice in your hand at once. Cold enough to write asterisk perished, careful enough to write asterisk buried, soft enough to write asterisk sorry, detached enough to never write asterisk Nancy, confused enough to be we asterisk and they in the same breath. That is not one consistent person. That is a contradiction wearing one set of words, and contradictions are where authors get caught. Here is the fact that should be keeping you up at night, and it has nothing to do with the desert. The note you just read was the asterisk second asterisk note. The first one, sent 4 days earlier, on February 2, from the same source, investigators believe, routed through the same kind of hidden server, said the opposite of everything. It said she was alive. It described her as scared but safe. And it demanded a ransom in Bitcoin, millions of dollars, with a deadline of February 5. Now line up the calendar because the timing is its own piece of evidence. The deadline was the 5th. The second note, the one that says she's dead and asks for nothing, arrives on the 6th. The day asterisk after the money was supposed to come and didn't. 2 notes, same hand, 96 hours apart, and a pivot that lands the morning after the ransom failed. Note 1, she is alive and here is the price. Note 2, she is dead and I want nothing. Sit inside that gap because the entire profile of the author lives in those 4 days. Something happened between pay me and I'm sorry, and whatever it was, it rewrote the writer from an extortionist into a mourner, right on the heels of a deadline nobody met. There are only a few kinds of people who travel that distance that fast. The first kind is the amateur whose plan detonated in his hands. He took her for money. He did not intend for an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker and a daily heart regimen to die in his custody. But reporting on the investigation suggests her pacemaker logged activity only until around 2:28 in the morning of the night she was taken, shortly after she was taken, in the note's own words. And if that's true, then she may have been gone before the first ransom note was ever sent. Which means the extortionist spent 4 days demanding millions for a woman who was already dead, watched his deadline pass with no way to produce the proof of life that would have unlocked the money, and then wrote the only thing left to write. In this reading, we are truly sorry is panic dressed as conscience. It's not for the family, it's for himself. The second kind is the opposite, and this is where it gets colder. The second kind is someone in full control, who wrote both notes knowing all along how this would end, and used the 4-day gap to manufacture a sequence. Demand first, so it reads as a kidnapping for profit. Apologize second, so the searching stops and the paying stops and the world is encouraged to grieve and move on. In this reading, we are truly sorry isn't panic and it isn't conscience. It's stagecraft. It's the closing line of a script that was written before Nancy was ever taken, and the ransom demand was never about money at all. It was about making sure the story looked like the kind of crime everyone already knows how to file away. And the third kind, the one Ian O'Reilly's skepticism opens the door to, is that the author of the note is not the kidnapper at all. And here the case gives you something concrete to hold, because the 2 credible notes were not the only messages this case produced. Other communications went to the media. One outlet reported receiving a note early on describing Nancy as scared, but okay, a phrase that doesn't match the others. That same outlet reported getting emails from someone claiming to know the kidnappers and offering information for $100,000. Investigators believe 2 notes came from the same IP and judged those potentially credible. But a high-profile case is a magnet, and around the real signal there is always noise. Opportunists, fantasists, people who want to feel the electricity of holding the most watched family in the country by the throat for the length of a paragraph. The third profile says the hand that wrote "We are truly sorry" belongs to one of them. Someone who knew something, or knew nothing, and inserted themselves into the void because the void was irresistible. Now layer in the detail that makes the first note so hard to wave away as pure invention. According to reporting on its contents, that first note didn't just demand money. It referenced specifics. What Nancy was wearing, a floodlight outside the home that had been damaged. Those are not details you pull from a news broadcast. Those are details you have only if you stood on that property in the dark, or if you are very close to someone who did. That single fact narrows the field of possible authors more than anything else in this case. It says the person behind the first note, at least, was there, or had a direct line to someone who was. And if the same hand wrote the second note, as investigators believe, then the apology, the perished, the buried in nature, all of it is coming from someone who was genuinely close to the act. Not a fantasist 2 states away. Someone with dirt from that property under their words. That is the fact your comment section is already fighting about, whether you've posted the video or not. So let's be precise about what it does and doesn't prove, because the difference is everything. So let's stop talking about the note for a moment and talk about who got to read it. Because there is a second story buried under the first one, and it changes how you should weigh every word we've just analyzed. You did not get to see that note in February. You did not see it in March, or April, or May. The sentences that declared Nancy Guthrie dead sat sealed for more than 4 months, and the public was allowed to keep hoping the entire time. That was a decision, and there are 2 ways to read it, the same way there are 2 ways to read everything in this case. The protective reading is the official one. If the public believes a woman is already dead, The tips dry up. People stop calling a hotline for someone they think is buried in the desert. So the worst sentence in the case was kept sealed. The reasoning goes, precisely to keep the country searching. Because one real tip from someone who actually knows is worth more than the entire federal apparatus combined. But there's a second reading, and a legal analyst named Chad Cummings has put his name to it publicly. His argument is that law enforcement may have known, or strongly suspected, within the first 48 hours that Nancy was dead. And that rather than admit they might have lost her early, the investigation let the leads that went nowhere keep running, kept the appearance of motion alive. And in doing so let a family stand in front of cameras for 4 months, pleading to pay a ransom for a woman a note had already buried. To the extent that gave them false hope, Cummings said, it was cruel. We're not telling you which reading is right. We're telling you that the note's audience matters as much as its author. Because if you're trying to profile the person who wrote those 3 sentences, you have to account for the fact that they chose to send a confession to an * television station, not to the FBI, not to the family, but to the press. Former federal agents have called that choice highly unusual, because it is. Kidnappers who want money contact the people with the money. They don't hand the most sensitive document in the case to a newsroom and let a producer decide what happens next. So why does a person root a confession through the media? Maybe because they wanted it public and didn't trust anyone else to make it public. Maybe because they had no clean, safe line to the family, and the press was the only door that wouldn't lead straight back to them. Or maybe, and this is the possibility that should make the hair on your arms stand up, because they understood exactly how the machine works. How a missing grandmother with a famous daughter becomes a national story. How that story generates pressure, attention, motion, noise. They wanted the machine running. And the fastest way to start it was to feed the press, not the family. The author didn't just write a note. They picked an audience. And the audience they picked tells you almost as much as the words they chose. So how do you actually catch the person who wrote this? Treat it the way the investigators have to, and watch every door close in your face. You start with the server. Both credible notes, investigators believe, came through the same secure, IP masking infrastructure, the digital equivalent of a voice run through a scrambler. The FBI tried to trace the origin. If they'd succeeded, we'd very likely have a name by now. We don't. That tells you the author had at least enough technical literacy to stay invisible across 2 separate messages, days apart, under the full weight of a federal investigation. That is not nothing. It cuts hard against the pyramidal theory and towards someone who planned the communications carefully, even if they did not plan the death. Someone who knew, before they ever sent a word, exactly how they were going to stay anonymous. You move to the physical evidence and the doors keep closing. There's DNA tied to the scene. It went into CODIS, the national database built on the promise that a violent stranger leaves a signature the country can match against millions of stored profiles. The search came back with nothing. No match. Whoever this is, they are not in the system. No prior violent felony that left a sample on file. That again points away from a career criminal with a long jacket and towards someone who has never been caught at anything serious, because they have likely never done anything like this before. A first-timer, which loops you right back to the amateur whose plan collapsed reading of the note. Do you feel the case doing this? Every single piece of evidence points 2 directions at once. Sophisticated enough to mask a server across 2 messages. Amateur enough to let a victim die by accident. Cold enough to write * perished. Soft enough to write * sorry. Careful enough to disable a floodlight and study the layout. Careless enough to leave blood at the door. Organized enough to script a ransom. Disorganized enough to abandon it the day after the deadline. The author is a person who is simultaneously a professional and a panicking novice, and no single profile holds all of it at the same time. Unless the profile you're building keeps breaking, because the assumption underneath it is wrong. Unless, as Iannarelli's skepticism keeps insisting, the hand that wrote the notes and the hand that physically took Nancy are not the same hand at all. Pull that thread and the contradictions resolve instantly. The planning belongs to whoever stood at that door in a mask, and the asterisk strange, remorseful. Pronoun-confused prose belongs to someone else entirely, someone closer to a keyboard than to the crime. It's the cleanest explanation on offer. It's also the one that means we may be profiling the wrong person every time we read those 3 sentences. Then you turn to the phrase that won't stop pointing south. Buried in nature. In June, a missing persons group across the border near Nogales, volunteers who spend their days excavating the desert for the disappeared, got an anonymous tip. A grave, the caller said, over a stream in a specific area. They went. They searched ground they hadn't been able to reach on an earlier attempt. In their work, they have uncovered more than 20 unmarked graves. None of them was Nancy. So even the one geographic word in the entire note, even asterisk nature, leads to a desert full of other people's tragedies, and not to her. The author handed the world a location that is somehow both a confession and a vanishing act, which is, by now, the most consistent thing about them. Everything they wrote points everywhere and resolves nowhere. Read it once, and it's the carelessness of a panicking amateur. Read it 10 times, and it starts to look like the signature of someone who knew precisely how much to say, and said exactly that and not one syllable more. Now let's address the thing your comment section. Does the second any video like this goes up? Because we said we wouldn't insult you, and pretending this part doesn't happen would be the biggest insult of all. In every case like this one, the internet turns toward the people closest to the victim. It's reflexive now. The 72-hour logic, though it's usually someone they knew asterisk statistic, the scrutiny of every public word and every expression a camera happens to catch. And in this case, there's a specific gravity to it, because Nancy's family is not anonymous. One of her children lives on the country's television screens every morning, and that visibility has turned the family's private grief into public text, to be read, paused, replayed, and read again. Here's what's actually on the record, and only what's on the record. In the days after the disappearance, the family responded to the notes directly and publicly. "We received your message. We understand. We beg you to return her. We will pay," her daughter has said. On air, honestly, we don't know anything, and that the family cannot be at peace, and that it is never too late to do the right thing. She has wondered aloud in public whether she herself was the reason her mother was targeted. "If it is me, I'm so sorry." When the note's contents broke this week, she sat in front of her own network's coverage of her own mother and said she couldn't pretend she wasn't there, that the family is in agony. That is documented public conduct. You are allowed to have feelings about it. Your audience will have them whether you invite them or not. But here is where this channel draws a line a lot of channels won't. And here is why it actually matters for the theory you're building, not just for the lawyers. Investigators have not named anyone close to Nancy as a suspect. No one in her family has been accused of anything by anyone with a badge. The person the investigation is actually chasing is the masked figure on that doorbell camera and the hand behind those 2 notes. And the asterisk insider knowledge asterisk detail, we keep circling back to the floodlight. The clothing does not point at a relative any more than it points at anyone who watched that house long enough to learn it. Proximity is not evidence. A famous daughter is not a motive. Grief that looks wrong on camera is not a confession. There is no correct way for a face to behave when its owner's mother has been declared dead by an anonymous email. And the single most dangerous thing an armchair investigator can do is mistake the person they can see asterisk for the person who did it, simply because the press keeps a camera trained on one and has no face at all for the other. So when you go to the comments, and you will argue about the asterisk author, argue about the voice in the note, the 4-day reversal, the deadline that passed, the server that beat the FBI, the verb, the missing name, the we asterisk that becomes asterisk they. Argue about whether we are truly sorry asterisk is a confession or a performance, and whether the hand that typed it ever touched Nancy at all. That's the debate the evidence actually supports, and it is a genuinely unresolved one. Smarter people than any of us are split on it right now. The other debate, the one about the faces you recognize from television, is the one the writer of that note may well have been counting on you to have. Because every hour the internet spends staring at the people it can see is an hour it isn't looking for the one it can't. And that person, the actual author of those 3 sentences, has stayed exactly where they've been this entire time. Unseen, unmatched, unnamed. Go back to the keyboard. A person sat down on the 6th of February. They opened a connection built to erase them. They chose a cold verb for a warm woman. They refused to write her name. They chose a location that is everywhere and nowhere. They slipped between we asterisk and they asterisk like someone who hadn't decided which one they were. They chose to apologize, and they chose, of all the inboxes in the world, a newsroom. And then they sent it, and they have not been heard from since. 3 sentences. That is the entire fingerprint. Not a face, not a name, not a sample the database recognizes. Just a voice, careful and cold and falsely soft, that told us, if you read it closely enough, almost everything about itself except the one thing we actually need. She perished shortly after she was taken. She is buried in nature now. We are truly sorry. Somebody wrote that. Somebody chose every word and discarded the warmer ones. Somebody knew about a damaged floodlight and the clothes she had on. Somebody decided the world should grieve and move on, and somebody is, right now, reading the coverage of their own note and watching to see whether it worked. It does not have to work. If you know anything about the figure at that door, about who could have written those 3 sentences, about a grave in the nature someone says she's buried in, the FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. And the Pima County Sheriff's Department is 523-50-140-900. There is a $1.2 million reward, and you can stay anonymous. The author of that note stayed anonymous too. You can be the one who doesn't. And in the comments, tell us what you hear in those 3 sentences. A panicking amateur or a patient architect. A real confession or a closing line. The hand that took her, or someone who was never holding her at all. Somebody out there wrote the note, and somebody out there knows the hand that did.